The nights always felt longer in the truck. Wind threaded through cracks in the doors, whispering over thin blankets that never quite trapped the warmth. The father lay awake more often than he slept, listening to his son's breathing from the passenger seat. Each inhale and exhale was a reminder that for now they were still here, still together. He'd tell Ethan that the stars were just holes punched in a dark roof so someone above could watch over them. Ethan would smile at that, small and tired, and trace constellations on the fogged glass. There wasn't much else to believe in when your home was 4 tires and an engine that coughed more than it purred. They drifted from town to town, parking near quiet roads or behind gas stations where the lights stayed mercifully dim. It wasn't adventure, though Ethan sometimes pretended it was. To him, every morning was a chance that something might finally change. To his father, every morning was proof that it hadn't yet. On one such morning, the road curved past a field gone brown from neglect. The sky was heavy with a grey that promised neither rain nor mercy. Then on the right side of the highway, a crooked neon sign flickered weakly against the light. Sonny's it read, letters half burned out, buzzing in uneven rhythm like a heartbeat that refused to stop. The diner itself looked forgotten. Weeds had crawled up the sides, glass panes were dusted opaque, and the yellow paint had peeled into the texture of old parchment. But even through the ruin, there was something stubborn about it. The sign tried. That's what Ethan noticed first. "Dad, look, it's trying," he said softly. His father slowed the truck, eyes narrowing. There was no real reason to stop. They had no money, nowhere else to go, and nothing in the world telling them this place was different. But something about that flicker, the same tired persistence he felt in his own bones, pulled at him. "Guess we could take a look," he murmured. Easing onto the gravel lot, they climbed out, stretching stiff limbs. The wind smelled faintly of rust and rain. The diner's door hung slightly askew, the handle cold under his palm as he pushed. Inside, the air was stale but not unkind. Rows of booths lined the walls, their vinyl cracked but upright. The counter bore the ghosts of 1,000 cups of coffee. A clock above the register had stopped at 2:17, perhaps years ago. Ethan stepped ahead carefully, as if he might wake someone. "It feels almost alive," he whispered. The father didn't answer. He was too busy imagining what this place once was. Voices, laughter, the clatter of plates, music from an old jukebox. He saw sunlight in the cracks, heard ghosts of breakfast orders, smelled grease and sugar. For a moment, he could almost pretend it was all still here. At the far end of the counter, a faded photograph sat in a frame, a woman in a checkered apron, smiling beside a man with kind eyes. Sonny and Joe's Diner, 1972. The caption below the photo was barely legible. Behind the counter lay a pile of mail, most of it unopened. He brushed dust from one envelope and tore it open. Inside was a letter written in looping, hopeful handwriting. "If someone finds this place one day, I hope they let it try again. It deserves that much." He stared at the words until they blurred. Ethan came around to read over his shoulder, and when he did, something wordless passed between them. An understanding, a spark. "Can we stay here tonight?" Ethan asked. The father hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, we can stay." That night they unrolled their blankets in one of the booths. The neon outside blinked through the window, pulsing across the boy's face like a soft heartbeat. The father sat awake long after Ethan fell asleep, tracing the cracks in the ceiling. The place groaned and whispered with age, but he swore it sighed differently than the truck. Morning arrived slow and colorless. The air was cold enough to see breath. He rummaged through the truck and found a half-empty jar of instant coffee and 2 mismatched mugs. There was no power, no running water, just an old percolator on the counter that looked like it hadn't been touched since the last century. Ethan was sketching on the back of a paper bag, his pencil scratching furiously. "If we cleaned it," he said without looking up, "people might come back." The father almost laughed, but stopped when he saw the drawing. His son had outlined the diner. Bright again, neon hole and windows gleaming. People sat in booths. Steam rose from cups. "Looks nice," he said quietly. Ethan beamed. "We could fix it." "You can fix anything, Dad." The man didn't have the heart to tell him that wasn't true. But he could fix small things, and maybe that was enough to start. He found a broom behind the counter, brittle bristles intact, and began sweeping the dust into soft grey clouds. Ethan wiped down tables with napkins and laughter. The work was pointless, beautiful, necessary. By midday, light spilled through half-cleaned windows. They ate the last of their bread and called it lunch. The sign outside flickered more steadily now, as if proud of their effort. Over the next few days, they stayed. The father found a nearby junkyard where the owner let him scavenge for free. He returned with screws, a cracked tool set, and a radio that only played static but made the silence bearable. Ethan painted over the walls, using leftover cans of yellow and white. It wasn't even, it was better. They fixed chairs with mismatched legs, straightened frames, patched a hole in the floor using plywood and faith. The diner was still far from new, but it was cleaner, warmer, and unmistakably alive. Then came the night they got the stove working. The father had spent all afternoon bent over its rusted body, fingers blackened with grease. When it finally sparked and glowed, both of them cheered. He fried the last 2 eggs they owned, one for each of them. The yolks broke, but they didn't care. "It smells like real food," Ethan said. "It is real food," his father replied, and smiled for the first time in weeks. That smile stayed as they sat in their booth, eating slowly, pretending the diner was open again, and customers might walk in any minute. Outside, the sign buzzed faithfully against the dark. Later that week, a stranger did stop by, a man in overalls with hands like leather and a truck full of lumber. He saw the lights, curious. "You folks open?" he asked. "Not yet," the father said, embarrassed. "Just cleaning up." The man looked around, nodded appreciatively. "Used to eat here every morning. Shame what happened after the highway bypassed this stretch. If you're fixing it, I got some spare boards out back." He returned 10 minutes later with 3 planks and a can of nails. "Left them by the door without asking for anything. Guess people remember," Ethan whispered. The father watched the man's truck disappear down the road. "Yeah," he said. "They do." That night they found another note taped beneath the counter. Same handwriting as before. "If you're trying, thank you. Keep trying. The world always needs places that do." The father read it aloud, voice rough. Ethan folded it carefully and tucked it into his sketchbook. Days passed, then weeks. The truck became less of a home and more of a storage shed for spare bolts, rags, and Ethan's sketchpads. The diner, on the other hand, began to hum again, not with customers, but with small sounds that felt like hope, the scrape of sandpaper, the click of a wrench, the hiss of the coffee pot on the repaired stove. Ethan kept a running list on a piece of cardboard he called the fix board. Every morning, he'd add something new. Window latch, still loose, booth 3, needs another screw sign, almost steady. His father would nod, pretend to inspect, and check 1 or 2 items off, even if they hadn't quite managed it. They were making progress. The diner was trying, and so were they. One afternoon, a pickup rumbled into the lot. The driver was a man in his 60s, weathered but strong, with a cap that had seen too many suns. He stepped out slowly, looking up at the sign, as if staring into a memory. "You the ones cleaning up Sonny's?" he asked. The father hesitated. "We're just keeping it from falling apart." The man's mouth curved into something between a smile and a sigh. "Name's Joe Jr. technically. My folks ran this place before it closed. Heard someone was poking around. Thought I'd see for myself." For a moment the father couldn't speak. The name was familiar now. Sonny and Joe's Diner, 1972. He gestured awkwardly to the inside. "We found some of their letters. We've been, fixing what we can." Joe Jr. nodded, eyes soft. He stepped behind the counter, running a calloused hand along the faded laminate. "She'd like that," he murmured. "My mom, Sonny, she said this place was alive. Said if you took care of it, it'd take care of you." He reached into his truck and came back with an old red toolbox, edges dented, initials JS scratched into the top. "If you're serious about fixing it, you'll need better tools than those." The father accepted the box like a gift too heavy to hold. "We can't pay you. Didn't ask you to," Joe said, turning toward the door. You're already paying it forward. Keep trying. That's what this place was built on. After he left, Ethan pried the toolbox open like a treasure chest. Inside were screwdrivers, pliers, a soldering iron, a small wrench set. Real tools, not scavenged scraps. His father lifted one and felt its weight solid and sure. From that day on, the repairs became purposeful. The walls brightened under new coats of mismatched paint. The booths, stitched with duct tape and fabric from an old curtain, looked almost stylish in their imperfections. The radio, once all static, caught a local signal that played old rock songs through fuzzy speakers. Then came Carol. She was the kind of woman who entered a room as if she'd always belonged there. 40-something, short-cropped hair, eyes that noticed everything. She'd seen the lights one evening while driving home from her shift at the post office and decided to stop. "You two running this place?" she asked, stepping inside. "Not really running," the father said. "Just rebuilding." Carol looked around, nodded once, and without another word, disappeared back out the door. 10 minutes later, she returned carrying a loaf of fresh bread wrapped in a towel. "You'll need something decent to eat while you work," she said. "And there's more where that came from if you don't burn down the county." Ethan laughed. The father tried not to, but failed. "Deal," he said. After Carol came Marco, the mechanic from the gas station 5 miles up the road. He brought an old coffee machine from his shop. "Customers don't sit around long enough for coffee anyway," he'd said, and even wired a line from the generator to keep it running. By the end of the week, the diner wasn't just theirs anymore. It had become something larger, a small gravity pulling in the lonely and the kind. Every person who stopped by left something behind: a chair, a can of paint, a memory. Someone dropped off an unopened bag of flour with a note, "For pancakes worth waking up for." Soon there were enough supplies to make a menu. Not much, a few breakfast items, coffee and toast, but enough to open the doors. The father hesitated, unsure if he had the right to call it open. Ethan solved that by painting a new sign from the back of a cereal box. Open, mostly. "Come try." He taped it to the front window. That first morning they made coffee for themselves and no one else. But around 9 o'clock, a trucker stopped for directions, saw the steam rising through the window and asked, "You serving?" The father looked to Ethan. "We can try," he said. The man ordered coffee and a sandwich. The bread was thick, the butter uneven, the eggs a little too runny, but he ate every bite. Before leaving, he put a $10 bill on the counter and said, "Keep the change. It's good to see this place breathing again." When he left, Ethan picked up the bill and stared at it as though it were a holy relic. "Dad," he whispered, "we just made money." They laughed until they cried. After that, more people came. Truckers, locals, drifters. Sometimes they paid, sometimes they didn't. It didn't matter. The coffee pot stayed full, the air stayed warm, and laughter began to stick to the walls again. Joe Jr. returned one afternoon with a small brown envelope. Inside was an official-looking document, transfer of ownership, signed and notarized. "You're the only ones who've cared enough in years," he said. "It's yours now. My folks would have wanted it." The father stared at the paper as though it were a mirage. "Joe, I can't—" "Sure you can," Joe interrupted. "Just promise me you'll keep the sign lit." The promise felt sacred. He signed without hesitation. From that day forward, Sonny's wasn't just a diner. It was home. They started traditions. On Thursdays, anyone who couldn't pay ate free. On Sundays, Ethan set up his sketchbook on a table by the window and drew portraits of whoever came in. People pinned them to the walls until every inch was covered in smiling faces. The fix board became the dream board. Its cardboard edges curled under the weight of chalk and imagination. Build a new booth. Plant flowers out front. Get a jukebox. Paint the ceiling like a sunrise. Some dreams came true, others waited. But the list never stayed empty. The diner endured storms that rattled its windows, long nights when the generator refused to start, and days when not a single customer came through the door. Each time they tried again. The sign flickered but never went dark. Then one morning, a small miracle arrived in the mail. It came in a plain envelope with no return address, just their name and the words, "Keep trying." Inside was a check for $500. The father stared at it in disbelief. Who would? Carol, sipping coffee at the counter, smiled knowingly. Maybe someone who believes in second chances. Or third, that money became paint, flour, sugar, and fuel for the generator. It stretched into months of survival. Each dollar felt like a thank you from the universe for not giving up. Ethan grew taller, stronger. He could handle the grill now, flipping pancakes with a confidence that made his father laugh. Dad's lucky pancakes, the customers called them. Guaranteed to stick to your ribs and your soul. The diner became a kind of heartbeat for the town again. A trucker from 2 states over mentioned it on the radio once, and people started coming just to see the diner that tried. They left notes in napkin holders, taped bills to the wall, donated books for a shelf near the door. In the evenings, after the lights dimmed and the last cups were washed, the father and son would sit by the window, staring at the flickering sign. It buzzed and hissed softly, as though whispering goodnight. Ethan would lean against his father's shoulder. "Do you think it's happy now?" he'd ask. His father smiled. "Yeah, kid, I think it is." Seasons began to leave their marks on the diner, the way years mark a face, subtle lines that only deepened its character. Spring brought muddy boots and truckloads of flowers Carol insisted on planting in chipped coffee cans along the porch. Summer smelled of bacon grease and open windows. The sound of laughter drifted through the screen door and out onto the highway. In autumn, the air filled with cinnamon and frying apples. Winter, though hardest of all, was also the truest. The sign's light pushing back against long nights like a single heartbeat in the cold. Time didn't rush there. It moved with the rhythm of coffee refills and the scrape of plates. The diner's walls collected stories. A veteran who came every Friday just to talk, a young couple who met over shared pie, kids who stopped on their way to college and promised to return someday. People wrote notes on napkins, thank yous, wishes, jokes, and stuck them in the cracks between panels. The father never took them down. He said the building needed memories to keep its bones strong. Ethan grew fast. His drawings changed from playful sketches to architectural plans. He measured tables, calculated counter space, even drew designs for new booths. When he wasn't serving coffee, he was at the back table, sketching the next version of the diner that lived in his head. Sleek, but warm, with big windows and a neon sign that didn't have to try anymore. "Someday," he'd tell his dad, tapping the page, "we'll build this for real." His father would nod, pretending he didn't hear the faint ache in that word someday. The townspeople had begun to treat Sonny's as if it had always been there. Birthdays, anniversaries, even memorials took place in Booth 3, the one patched together with too many screws, but loved all the same. They hosted Sunday breakfasts where anyone could bring something to share. Truckers pinned photos of their families on a corkboard near the counter. The place had become part cafe, part church, part living room for everyone who needed one. Still, the father sometimes caught himself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the sign to go dark, for the bills to pile too high. But every time the worry grew, something happened to remind him why they'd stayed. Once, during a storm that knocked out power across half the county, the diner's generator sputtered and died. For a moment, the inside went completely black. Then through the rain, headlights appeared. Marco's truck, Carol's sedan, even Joe Jr.'s old pickup. Within minutes, lanterns and candles filled the diner. Someone started humming, then singing. They cooked pancakes by flashlight and poured coffee from thermoses. The storm howled outside, but inside the air was full of warmth and music. Ethan had stood near the window, face lit by candlelight, watching lightning crawl across the hills. "It's like the world tried to turn us off," he said, "but we wouldn't let it." His father smiled at that. "Guess the place taught us well." After the storm, they found that the sign, the same old neon that had never fully worked, had burned a little brighter. The buzz steadied. The color sharpened. It was as if the storm had shaken something loose, made it breathe again. Years folded into one another, and the diner became their anchor. When Ethan turned 17, he won a small scholarship for his drawings. The letter came on a cold morning, edges smudged with excitement. "Dad," he said, breathless, "they want me to study design. Real design. In the city." The father's throat tightened. Pride and fear tangled together like wires. That's amazing, kid." Ethan looked at him carefully. "You'll be okay here, right?" "Sonny's and me, we've been through worse," he said with a grin that almost hid the ache beneath it. "Besides, someone's got to keep your pancakes on the menu." They celebrated that night with a whole pie and extra syrup for everyone who walked in the door. The community toasted him like he was their own son, and in a way he was. The morning Ethan left for college, the sign flickered wildly, as if waving goodbye. His father watched the truck disappear down the highway, the taillights shrinking into the horizon. He stood outside until the sound faded, then went back in, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat in their old booth. The diner felt both emptier and fuller than ever before. He kept it running on his own. Joe Jr. stopped by every so often to help with repairs. Carol still dropped off bread, and Marco made sure the generator stayed alive. Without Ethan's laughter, though, the air changed. Quieter, older, but never still. The diner had learned how to breathe on its own. Letters came from the city, sketches, stories, photos of buildings Ethan was designing. He always signed them the same way. "Keep the light on. I'm coming home soon," and the father always did. Each night before locking up, he'd step outside, look up at the sign, and whisper, "Still trying, kid. Still trying." Years later, Ethan returned, not as a boy with sketches, but as a man with plans rolled under his arm. The truck he drove was newer, though the same lucky dice hung from the mirror. The town had changed, a few new shops, a few old ones gone, but the diner still stood at the edge of the road. Paint faded, sign buzzing faintly. When he stepped inside, Carol nearly dropped her coffee pot. "Well, I'll be damned. Look who finally decided to visit his own kitchen." He laughed and hugged her, breathing in the scent of flour and home. Then he turned to see his father behind the counter, wiping the same section of laminate he'd been wiping for years. The man looked up, eyes wide, then soft. "Hey, stranger." "Hey, Dad." They said nothing for a long moment, just stood there in the hum of the lights and the clatter of dishes. Finally, Ethan unrolled his blueprints across the counter. "I think it's time we fix the roof, and maybe build the extension Mom always talked about." His father traced a finger along the drawings, clean lines, open windows, sunlight spilling in. "You sure you want to spend your fancy architect skills on an old diner?" Ethan smiled. "It's not old. It's home." They worked through the summer just like before, father and son, hammer and laughter. Locals helped when they could. Kids painted signs, truckers hauled supplies. The smell of sawdust mingled with coffee until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. When it was done, the diner looked the same but different, brighter, steadier, like a memory retold with clearer eyes. The new roof shone in the morning light. The walls wore fresh yellow paint, and above it all, the sign glowed unbroken for the first time in decades. Opening day was a celebration that spilled into the street. People came from every corner of the county. There were pancakes stacked high, free coffee refills, and a new chalkboard behind the counter titled "Pay It Forward." Anyone could buy a meal for someone else by writing their name on the board. Within an hour, it was full. Near closing time, Joe Jr. stood by the window, hat in hand, eyes shining. "Your folks would be proud," he said softly. "She used to tell me the light out front was hope. Said as long as it flickered, she knew someone cared." The father nodded. Unable to speak, later that night, when the crowd was gone and the last dishes were drying, Ethan and his father sat at their booth again. Outside, the neon buzzed gently, steady and bright. "You ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't stopped that day?" Ethan asked. His father looked out at the sign, at the fields beyond, at the road that had once been their whole world. "We probably would have kept driving," he said. "And I think about that sometimes. But then I remember, some things are meant to find you when you're too tired to keep going." Ethan rested his chin on his hand. "You think the diner would have survived without us?" The father smiled faintly. Maybe it would have found someone else. But I think it needed us the same way we needed it. It's like you said, it tried. And so did we. They sat in silence, listening to the low hum of the sign and the soft clink of cups cooling on the counter. The night outside was endless and kind. Eventually, the father stood, walked to the door and flipped the lock. Then he stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the cool air. The sign's glow washed over him, painting his hands gold. He reached up, brushed the edge of the glass and whispered, "Thank you." Inside, Ethan turned off the lights one by one until only the neon remained. It wasn't flickering anymore. It burned steady, a small sun over an old road. In the years that followed, Sunny's became more than a diner. It became a legend. Travelers wrote about it in guidebooks and blogs, calling it the place with the light that never quits. Kids who'd grown up eating there brought their own families. People left gifts, photographs, recipes, tiny carvings of the sign, and every morning, before the first customer walked in, Ethan, now the one behind the counter, would make 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one for his father, who sat by the window, older now but still smiling. They didn't need words. The hum of the diner said everything. The walls held laughter. The napkins still caught dreams. The air still smelled of sugar and chance, and outside, just beyond the window, the sign glowed against the dawn. It didn't flicker anymore. It didn't have to. It was light, steady, patient and alive, trying not just for itself, but for everyone who ever stopped long enough to believe that a broken thing could still shine.